All right, hi everyone. Welcome to Philosophy Bro. I am the unequal philosophy bro for the purposes of this chat, aka Andrew, and I'm going to start a book series on the famous Enlightenment philosopher who had a lot of impact on the French Revolution, Rousseau, who also famously wrote The Social Contract. I'm going to talk about his book called Discourse on Inequality and specifically his claim in this paragraph that I'm about to comment on that civilization increases in equality. So let's get into the quote here. In fact, we may easily perceive that among the differences which distinguish men, several pass from natural, which are merely the work of habit, and the different kinds of life adopted by men living in a social way. That makes sense. That sounds agreeable. There are things that are natural about the way people live. Thus, a robust or delicate constitution and the strength and weakness which depend on it are oftener produced rather by the hardy or effeminate manner in which a man has been brought up. Interesting. Than by the primitive constitutions of his body. So I think he's saying that basically that civilization feminizes men, which is an oversimplified claim because he goes throughout this like without explicitly saying it, I think, back to this idea that's been popular for a long time, which is an oversimplified analysis of the history of hunter gatherers, which is that they were egalitarian rather not Italian, and everything was great for all of them. Basically, this is the utopian vision, which is the opposite of the dystopian vision of other famous philosophers like Thomas Hobbes, who had the polar opposite opinion, which is that basically before the Enlightenment, human life was nasty, brutish, and short, as he said. All right, so anyway, back to the quote here. So he's saying that civilization feminizes men, which I don't think is necessarily true. It is the same, thus, in regard to the forces of the mind, and education not only produces a difference between those minds which are cultivated and those which are not, but even increases that which is found among the first in proportion to their culture. Hmm, that makes sense. Education produces a difference between different minds, but a difference between minds which are cultivated by education and which minds which are not is found people can become more or more intelligent depending on the education and their culture, basically, is what he's saying. That makes sense. Let a giant and a dwarf set out in the same path, and the giant at every step will acquire a new advantage over the dwarf. So he's saying this analogy, of course, the the so-called meritocracy is kind of a myth that there are people who are just going to always start off with advantages over other people, and there are other people who are going to be disabled in comparison, and those are completely polar opposite comparisons, obviously, right? A giant is always going to have an advantage over a dwarf in things that require like speed, strength, or size or anything. Maybe there would be advantages to being smaller if you're a dwarf for some things, like perhaps getting into small, tight, and enclosed spaces. But yeah, you can see how there are going to be advantages between giants and dwarves, obviously, for many things in life, right? So let a giant and a dwarf set out on the same path. The giant at every step will acquire a new advantage over the dwarf. Now, if we compare the prodigious variety in the education and manner of living of different orders of men in a civil state, with the simplicity and uniformity that prevails in the animal and savage life, where all this is such a run on sentence, where all the individuals make use of the same ailments, live in the same manner, and do exactly the same things, we shall easily conceive how much the difference between man and man in the state of nature must be less than the state of society. So the state man and man in the state of nature are let is inferior to the state in society. I think he's kind of trying to say the opposite of that. But this is another interesting point here that I definitely don't agree with. And this is an oversimplification, and like I said, a super verbose way of expressing this message too. So if you compare the variety in education and manner of living in different orders of men in the civil state, with the simplicity that prevails in the animal and savage life. In the animal and savage life, he's putting forth this notion that, natural animal and savage life or hunter gatherers, everything was all equal. People did the same thing. They made use of the same ailments. So I think he's is saying there that man in the state of nature is better than man in the state of society, because society feminizes men and it increases inequality, and we've gone from this mythical egalitarian society to uh, the complete opposite, this dystopian society where men are feminized and there's always endless inequality due to the effects of civilization itself. So again, I disagree with that notion, but it is interesting. All right, so let's get back to the quote here. Um, must be less than the state of society. Oh, I didn't even finish that. And how much every inequality of institution must increase the natural inequalities of the human species. Yes, that's a crucial final part there. How much every inequality of institution must increase the natural inequalities of the human species. So he's saying that institutions are unequal. Like I was saying, he was alluding to his opinion that there's no such thing as a meritocracy, basically, that some people are always going to have advantages over others, and other people are always going to have disadvantages over others. And so he's saying that these like what he sees as inherent inequalities in institutions contribute to the entire natural inequalities of the entire human species. So institutions are unequal, which makes the entire human species unequal. Obviously, that's an enormous logical jump. Even if you think uh, institutions are inherently unequal, even if you accept that for the sake of argument, as Ben Shapiro would say, um, then it's still a massive logical jump from saying that institutions are unequal to saying that society as a whole is unequal because these institutions are unequal. And obviously, I do think it's a myth that meritocracy is essentially a myth, and there are any inherent inequalities in institutions. But I think he probably thinks that inequality is more extreme than I do, and a lot of other people do as well. A lot of lefties in particular, of course. And like I said, I agree with some of his points and disagree with others. But anyway, even I think that there are inequalities in institutions, but they're not so extreme that they lead to the entire human race being unequal. But the human race being unequal in terms of their advantages and stuff, which is the way in which Rousseau is talking about it. I think that's true, but I still don't think that the inequalities are so bad that it makes society as a whole unequal, and thus civilization as a whole increases inequality, which is his thesis in this paragraph or this section here. So I don't think he's even demonstrated, even if you agree with him, I don't think that Rousseau has even demonstrated logically that civilization increases equality, because he's also just making, as I've said before, as Kant would say, synthetic a priori claims, which I've used faith claims, that these these institutions are unequal, which again I agree with, but you should provide arguments for why and how you think they're unequal. And like I said, you have to clarify this massive logical jump from the claim that there are inequalities in institutions to the claim that this means this increases inequality as a whole for all of society. So he's not proven that civilization increases inequality, because he has not proven, most crucially, that uh, that inequalities and institutions lead to natural further equality for all of human society or human civilization. All right. So yeah, those are like I said, I agreed with many parts of that section on his claim that civilization increases inequality, and I think he has a kernel of a point. But as often happens with philosophers, he's making way too hyperbolic of a claim. And I agree that there are definitely some problems with civilization, and there are some advantages to hunter gatherer lifestyles in comparison to so called civilization. But I think there are pros and cons to both. And if you listen to or pay attention to and learn from people like Dr. Robert Sapolsky, for example, and other anthropologists and archaeologists and people like that. I know Robert Sapolsky isn't, but he's talked a lot about hunter gatherers in his books, and he's done a lot of work studying primates. Anyway, that it's a mixed bag. It's not that hunter gatherer societies were egalitarian, but it's certainly not the case, like Thomas Hobbes, as Thomas Hobbes would say, that life was nasty, Brutus, and short either. It's a mixed bag. There was good in some ways, and it was better in civilization than other ways, and it's worse in different ways, which makes sense. And I think most people would probably agree these oversimplified extreme statements that either hunter-gatherer cultures were superior to modern civilization, or the opposite, that modern civilization is superior to hunter-gatherer cultures, like completely. I think both of those claims are incorrect. Anyway, thanks again for watching, everyone. I am now the Philosophy Bro instead of Mindgasms. Hope you like that change. My friend suggested it, and I thought it was a good one. So yeah, I started this series on Rousseau's Discourse on Inequality. I'm going to make just a few other videos because it's actually a short essay and there are only a few key parts to me. So let me know what you think about that. Look forward to future videos. Like and comment on this. Like the button, smash it, make sweet love to it, elbow drop it, anything you want to do, as long as you click that like button. Subscribe to the channel. A lot of people watch the videos but don't subscribe, so please do so. It's easy to do it. And click that bell when I come out with new videos. I think my next one will be a clip from my podcast with my friend Dusty on George Orwell's famous book Animal Farm, about how even the communist revolutionary pigs are corrupted by money and power. So check that out as well. And check out my Patreon page. The link is in the description as always. And like I always say, the funk, always remember this. Most importantly, the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And Rousseau is a very fascinating philosophical thinker who has some dumb points, but he makes some really good arguments too, even though his conclusions are often not supported by his arguments because they're not very good. But he's still definitely a valuable thinker for the history of philosophy. All right. Anyway, thanks again, everyone. I am the Philosophy Bro, and keep spreading philosophy everywhere. And adios until next time.